admit our waiting audience here. Got about 25 people in the queue. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Well, good to see everybody, as always. Warms my heart every Saturday to see all these people.
Absolutely lovely. Linda Kay always finding herself under a lovely palm tree.
Linda Kay is the epicenter of groove.
Epicenter of groove. Excellent. And Pooja, if you just keep an eye on the waiting room and let people in as they come in, that'd be great. Because it looks like we got 10 people since we opened it up anyway. So a lot of people jumping on here.
So, good morning, everyone. All you magical men and women. We're really happy to be here. Really happy that I belong to a little nerd-esque, trippy, weirdo community called piano technicians. And more than that, piano technicians that are really trying to get better, that are really trying to raise their game. It's a real privilege to be one of you and to be with you. So Eathan, give him a pitch. Give him our sponsor's message.
All right, excellent. Give me 1 second. I'll load that up here. So yeah, thank you guys all for coming today. Just a quick reminder that Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses. We're bringing you live instruction from the best of the best all around the world and recorded access in a wonderful member area, which you can sign up for at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. And beyond that, just a few quick updates. We've got a masterclass with Jude Reveley, amazing piano rebuilder out there outside of Boston, who has a design-driven restoration way of going about his business, which is pretty incredible. And we'll be putting a link in the chat later where you can sign up to attend Jude Reveley's session on November 21st. And we're going to be putting together a conference in December. It'll be 3 days over the 10th to the 12th of December, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, with some excellent instructors, including the one and only David Andersen. So yeah, there's a little intro from our sponsor. And last week we hit the ground running with tuning. We thought we might cover a few topics, and we had a lot to cover on tuning and a few other limited things. So there's still a lot left to talk about, and we're going to dive back into it. And before I forget, I'll also remind you, our guest for next week is also an incredible human. I haven't met him personally, but David knows him well. Udo Steingraber of Steingraber and Sohn. He'll be tuning in at 8 p.m. his time, Germany, to join us next week for Radio Hour. So that should be very exciting. Make sure you catch that. So David, we were talking a little bit about an email that came in from Mark Steiger, and he had a question for you. He said last week, had a wonderful conversation about tuning. Just wondering if you could discuss tuning stability and how to achieve stability in tuning. Any thoughts to launch us off with there? I got to unmute.
There you go.
There you go.
You bad boy.
You should be able to unmute yourself, David, because I made you a co-host.
I couldn't.
You can do it?
It was controlled by the host.
I'll try to fix it.
Tuning stability. Maybe, certainly one of the most crucial aspects of being a good piano tuner. being a stable tuner has so much to do with your ability to move the pin in the block in super, super precise ways. So when all the old school books, tuning instruction books used to say, just practice turning the pin the shortest, teeniest possible length, and just turn the pin an eighth of a turn using this. See if you can do it 20 times in an eighth of an inch. See if you can do it really super small. And the reason that that's good, and the reason is because you all know it. It's an incredible touch thing, feel thing to tune a piano. The way I've gotten to a place where I can tune stable enough to have world-class players play fortissimo on my pianos and not go out is by this. Here's the way I tune a note, okay? I tune it with whatever note I'm tuning it with, put it right on pure, and then I just come up the smallest amount I can, but with turning the pin so that I can feel the pin turn. Whether it's a click or just a subtler feeling than that, but you can actually feel with your body, with your being, the pin has turned. And I want it to be just at the most several cents above. At the most, and hopefully not that far. All right, so you've set the pin, and then you just rock the hammer down. You just kind of rock it down like that until you get to where the note's supposed to be. Tuned with your other note. And Ed Foote explained it way better than I can. You're creating torque in the pin, but it's a resting torque. It's a torque where the pin is supposed to be. It's where the pin is kind of, once you do those moves, it's kind of preloaded to sit and stay. And that's, however you get to that state of being just slightly above and that the pin is torqued down slightly. Am I making sense, Eathan? Is this making sense? Are you able to see what I'm saying?
So you want to make sure the pitch is slightly above where you want it to be, but you want the actual pin to not be in pulling against the tension of the string, but kind of going with what the natural.
That's right. Going back down.
Pull is.
And it'll come to its resting place, which is in most tunings in tune. You can make the resting place, it's in tune. And then, then I play with the hammer to try to move the pin. Test flow is useless at that point. But if you manipulate the hammer on the pin, just kind of move it around, if the pin is not set, it'll come loose. So you instantly know. But that feeling of moving the pin, I know most of you know what I'm talking about. It's a very subtle feeling. Sometimes it's a click, sometimes it's not so subtle, but many times it's very subtle, very subtle. And you have to be paying attention to really be able to do it, with a lot of precision. So the move is to get the string a tiny bit, hopefully a cent or two above, and then kind of rock it down, knock it down very lightly, very precisely. These are small movements of your hand, You have to approach a tuning like, sculpting something long and smooth out of clay, It's a soft touch. It's a light touch. Yeah, sometimes you gotta rear back and pull stuff up and be, strong. But most of the time in tuning, it's an incredibly light touch. All right, so questions.
Carl Lieberman said he might like to make a comment. Do you want to unmute yourself, Carl, and jump in?
I think am I unmuted?
No,
I just unmuted you.
Yeah,
I unmuted you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, I agree with what David just said. I think sometimes though, pianos are different. Sometimes you want to bump the piano up and have a little too much tension in the non-speaking length. But the 2 points I want to make. This is what Dan Levitin calls the wisdom of the hand. All of us who have done this for so long, we all have slightly different techniques for getting to that neutral position where it's going to hold. And you feel it, you know it. You've done it so many times. It's not a conscious thing. It's like I always say, people have all of these descriptions of stability and how to get it and the physics of stability. And it's like describing the way you walk. You can make it so complicated that you can't walk. It's a feeling type of thing. That's number one. Number two, I don't think something that David spoke to, and I believe this. The order that you tune the strings in has something to do with stability. And, as an ETD tuner, I think there's an advantage to going from the lowest note to the highest note. But whether you're an oral tuner or an ETD tuner, I think there's a real advantage to doing unisons as you go, which David does with his open tuning and which we do by doing unisons as you go. When you have a stable unison after you have all three strings tuned, it's going to be more stable than coming back to it and putting the outer strings in. So I'm a big believer that stability, part of stability is tuning unisons.
Oh, that was probably the biggest revelation when I started to do open string, when I quit using a temperament strip, was that, my God, the temperament is stable now, I mean, I used to tune and set a great temperament, then come back and pull the strip, and it would be slightly out. It wouldn't be exactly as I'd set it, and exactly as my stability had, it could stay where I put it. I was, it was good, but it just, when you move the outside strings, the pitch very often, wouldn't you say, Carl, very often changes?
Depending on how much you move it. I'm not someone who's a big believer in the Weinrich effect. Maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't.
Oh,
I think it's a subtle effect. I don't think things move a couple of cents by tuning the outer string.
Oh, no way. Just things move a phase.
Yeah, they may move a tiny bit, and it may just be because of the different pressure on the bridge. It may be because of phase coupling. It may be, I don't know enough to know.
I
But I
don't
do
either.
think that doing the two other strings affects the general pitch level of the unison.
Yeah,
So you wanna, you know,
for a long time, I didn't know that name, the Weinrich effect. We called it the Virgil Smith effect because he had identified it and identified that was one of the main reasons that he tuned open string. One of the 2 or 3 main reasons he tuned open string, because it was so much more stable. And so if you're wanting stability, if you're wanting to have that temperament and the rest of the piano afterwards stay where you put it and not move when the left and right strings get pulled up, then really strongly consider open string tuning. Whether it's a hybrid tuning or a strictly oral tuning, just consider it. Consider how, I'll tell you what, I gained a ton in stability when I went open string. A ton. I really did. So, any other questions from the peanut gallery?
I'll cut in with a couple of things. One, just from a more young, like a fresher, newer perspective of someone who might not, who remembers like transitions between periods of understanding. Maybe this doesn't affect everyone here, maybe just a couple people or none. But if anybody is affected by this, it's important. The hammer that you use is very important to your stability. So if you have a nice rigid hammer, these carbon fiber hammers, some of these hammers, they're gonna cost you a couple $100, but the difference in what you can literally feel it at the end of the hammer, you can feel these subtle little twitches and nicks, and I almost feel it's like a little tick. I feel a tick in the end of the hammer, which indicates to me when things are settling in. And it's actually quite surprising I literally feel something going on, and that's more of a tactile thing. So I think that's useful to just bring that up, make sure that's stated there.
So that's 3 piano technicians that have all said. First I said, then Carl confirmed it, and then you're confirming it now with your experience, that it's a feel thing. It's not thinking about stuff. Thinking about how you move things and picturing the pin moving in the block and yada, yada, all this thinking about stuff. It's not about that. It's about feeling it with your body. It's a feel thing. It's a complete feel thing. The more you get into it, and the more you get micro movement about it, the better you tune. And the more pleasure you'll get from tuning, because you're really getting precise.
Another thing that could be useful, I picked up from Mario Egrek's book, and he's got a little chart listing different types of lubricants you use in different areas of the piano. One of the lubricants he mentions is the string contact points. So where the strings are going across A graphs or bridge pins and so forth, you can lubricate those contact points. And I think some people will default to doing it when maybe the strings are corroded, but I think it can be a good habit to get into, to just lubricate those string contact points so that as you move that string, it's moving neatly and cleanly along with what you're doing, so that it can settle into a stable place that has more to do with the pitch that you want and less to do with little imperfections in the string or little places where it's getting stuck.
All right, Mark Steiger's asking, are test blows of any value? Great question. And different people, different great tuners will tell you different things. I don't do triple fortissimo blows when I tune. I don't do that. I'll do one between forte and double forte pop if I have any question that the pin is settled. I believe that my technique takes care of the string settling along its home length without pounding the hell out of the string. Pounding the hell out of the string does a bunch of stuff. It's hard on the piano, it's hard on your finger, it's hard on your ear. And in my experience of tuning hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pianos for performances, I didn't ever need to pound those pianos to keep them in tune for an intense performance or an intense set in a concert. Very often tuned at intermission, very often. Did some smoothing at intermission. But, you know, stability is not super loud pounding for me. Now, if somebody can speak to au contraire and say, no, man, that's my method is test blows, heavy test blows, and can talk about successes, let's go. I'd love to hear about it.
I can give just another perspective on what you're talking about. I noticed in tuning that there's definitely been, I felt like I had to go through phases. One where I was maybe afraid to test blow hard enough, you know, or to like jostle it, right? It was a thing where you always encounter this when you have a piano that has like loose tuning pins or something, but you get in this situation where, okay, there it is. Let's move on, make sure it stays where it is. And then I got past that point where I said, okay, I'm gonna give this piano the treatment, right? And I would go up and down the piano and every single key, you know, before my final pass, I'd really give it a knock just to make sure it didn't go out. And then I think in more alignment with what you're saying, I have noticed sometimes, especially going en masse in the entire piano and banging a bunch of notes out, there's something about it. It seems like it destabilizes the strings actually, or it, you know, might even send them a little bit sharp or do something really funny. So I've noticed that you can definitely go too far with test blows, and it seems like it can just destabilize the string in a way that isn't necessary. And it's not really analogous to a pianist actually pounding it like they would, because they're usually distributing the force between multiple fingers, and they're really not gonna bang a key that hard. Yeah, Carl.
So, you know, Steve Brady has a technique he calls the forearm smash. And I've taken to doing this on stage pianos, you know, where when you're done, he lifts the sustain pedal up and he plays all of the notes with his forearms to kind of get the whole thing moving as a system. And if the piano is stable after that, it's going to be stable. I think that's a very demanding test.
Now, does he smash them hard like forte?
Well, he plays them pretty forcefully, but he's playing clusters of notes with his forearms. So he's playing like a dozen notes at a time with each arm, and the pedal is on. So he wants the whole piano kind of.
Oh, he wants the strings to resonate out, to like
exactly
unlock if they're going to and stuff.
Yeah, and that's if the piano is stable after that, the piano is stable.
Yeah. And we should also mention that, you know, the unisons kind of, in my experience, lock into each other. Once you get a one string tuned, and then you can get the other strings to kind of lock into it. And that's when real stability is achieved, in my opinion. Okay.
So next, coming in a comment that came to me privately here, probably not intentionally private, but Chuck Becker says, could we please comment on hammer choice?
Yeah, I can, and then Eathan can. For the first 20 odd years of my career, I used an old Hale hammer with a pressure fit head that was an extension hammer. So I used a long, light, early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century hammer to try to get leverage and stiffness. And then, I don't know, 20 odd years ago, I was a beta tester for Charles Falk with his first hammers, which were made out of titanium. Was no carbon fiber was not happening. It was titanium, and it was a profound difference. And then I beta tested each one of his titanium, carbon generations of hammers. And there's, from what I understand, I've tuned with a Fuyang, I've tuned with a Rayburn. They're beautiful hammers. They're beautiful hammers. Any of the light, stiff, as Eathan has said, any of the light, stiff hammers that you can buy for not $200, but more like $300, are really going to be good. The Falk, the way it's made, the way it feels in my hand, the way it looks, just the way it is, exactly. Yes. That hammer it's just a beautiful thing. He's really a good maker and he does a great job. And, the difference in a regular tuning hammer, an old school tuning hammer, that's like wearing driving gloves. Falk's hammer is like wearing micro fine surgical gloves. It's a difference. It's a big difference. Okay, other questions, Eathan?
Yeah, some other stuff is coming in. Yeah, I got this Falk several years ago, and there's multiple sides to just having a nice hammer. One is the stiffness and the lightness of it, and also just kind of as I think Boaz comment, he just likes to have nice looking tools, that are high quality and gives him a sense of pride in what he's doing. So I can definitely second that. And just it made tuning easier. Not only, and it made the tunings better, and it made the tunings easier. And it's one of those purchases kind of that you're like, oh, once you get it, you're like, oh, why didn't I have that sooner? My life would have been a lot easier.
Oh, it's my favorite tool by quite a stretch. It made life an order of magnitude easier, tuning life, more pleasurable.
So I don't see a lot of questions per se. There's some comments in place, but I'm wondering if we've talked about tuning a little bit and we could continue, but I'm curious if we want to shift over to regulation a little bit.
Yeah, voicing or regulation. I'd love to. And I really want this group to be active. And I want a good topic to talk about, either voicing or regulation. What's something that you're really challenged by, or something that you want to know more about? We'll try to, with this group wisdom we have, we'll try to provide something.
Here's a question. Any comments on quick steam voicing for rock hard hammers?
At a certain point in my career, I did a bunch of steam voicing because of rock hard hammers. And this was in the classic, 80s, 90s, when there was like truly rock hard hammers. And I did it a different way. Most people did it with a hammer iron and a damp cloth. I got it down to where I could dip the hammers in the spout of a tea kettle and basically tell on one test hammer how long I should leave it in the spout, sneak up on it, and do it that way quicker, about half as much time. And did it did what it does. It I don't think I've ever used it on a really good set of hammers, but those old rock hard, kind of brick hammers that they used to put on pianos. There was some initial Renner sets and runs and Renner copy sets and runs that were just so hard. So for that, yeah, it's fine. When you run across pianos where you can't even hardly get a needle in the felt, and you just have an intuitive feeling that no amount of needling is going to get anywhere near where you want to go, then steaming is the way to go. And there's tons of YouTube videos about different steaming protocols. As for good hammers in today's pianos, no, I don't use it.
Can I say something about steaming?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Can I say something about steaming?
Sure.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I use steaming frequently. I work on a lot of Japanese pianos. I think steaming is an amazingly great technique. I rest the hammers on the key slip so that they're up a little bit. I do a section at a time. I put a Viva scrub towel, a damp towel over the hammers. I steam at 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and 1 o'clock. I never steam over the crown because it deadens the attack. You need to be very careful if you're not shaping the hammers, because the grooves, if you fuzz up the grooves, you'll destroy the attack.
Right.
But, as a 10-minute procedure on Yamaha or Kawai Grands that are packed down, you can warm up the hammers uniformly. What I like about using an iron as opposed to the tea kettle thing is when you run it across, and I move it fairly quickly, you're putting the same amount of water in each hammer. It's very consistent. You don't have to do a lot of catching up afterwards to even things up.
So how do you hit those specific points? 11, 3, 1.
9, 3, 11, 1.
9, 3, 11, 1. How do you do that? With the edge of the hammer or the tip of the hammer?
No. The hammers are a section of the hammers is on the key slip underneath the shanks, so they're sticking up. The Viva scrub towel is now over the entire section. I take an actual iron and I move it left to right at 9, left to right at 3, left to right at 11, left to right at 1, and then I listen to the section.
Wow.
It's
like a
very
regular
fast.
iron.
It's very effective.
Wow. You're blowing my mind. Wow. Okay. Wow.
He's ironing your mind.
Yeah, he's ironing my mind. That's great. Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Anybody else have steaming stories or
Well,
not
I have to
steam?
add this because Susan's been mentioning a little bit. She uses some vodka as a sort of steam in a bottle. She said
Sally Phillips.
Susan Klein is saying that. Yeah.
Oh, Susan Klein. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Small dropper bottle in a Ziploc bag. Does not require much effort, causing no damage to the bridge. She said vodka has to be used with restraint, and I'm assuming she's just talking about applying it to the hammers.
Yeah, but how does she say?
But she says not as much as restraint as steaming actually was part of the actual comment she was making. What did you say, David?
Does she
Was the
say
question?
how much she uses?
I mean, we could ask her if she wants to chat for a second.
Yeah.
Uh,
how much do you use when you use vodka as a hammer softener?
So Susan, you should be able to unmute yourself if you like. I gave you access to do that. And then you should be unmuted now.
Unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hey, Susan.
Okay. I use as little as will give me the effect I want. And I don't use it directly on the crown except in octave 7 sometimes, where it just sounds like broken glass up there. And just 1 or 2 drops right in the string grooves. We'll put just a little cushion on there without taking away the brightness. And it doesn't hurt the felt, and you don't have to lose any felt. So I use that up there.
In the other octaves, in the not string groove octaves, where do you put it in that? And just a couple of drops as well?
I usually put it at about 11 and 1 o'clock.
Okay. And like drop, 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 or drop, drop, or?
Yeah, it depends on the piano. If the piano is really, really hard, I will use a little bit more, but I try not to go above 11 o'clock over onto the crown with it.
Okay. And the sonic effect you get is basically the same?
It takes that very, very sharp, nasty edge down while leaving the bright attack.
So it's very much like steam or like deep needle.
It's a little like what you can do with a chopstick needle entering just in front of the string grooves.
Yeah.
And very short needle.
Yeah. 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 Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for sharing,
my
Susan.
friend. It's a pleasure to hear your voice.
Well, it's here for now.
Yes,
Thanks for sharing, Susan.
You're welcome.
All right.
I feel like, regulation. I feel like I should have questions maybe for you, David, or anybody else that would like to share. I think. Okay, I'm going to ask this question, see if you feel like it's worth addressing. I'm actually, although we're talking about gaining skills, I'm just curious about anybody's experience. Michael Spreeman's just joining us here in a minute. With like outsourcing, or like how you might go about sharing a job if you have someone else do action work or things like that. Is that something anyone could make a comment on, or David, do you team up with your co-conspirator in your operation there, and part of you does some of the regulation, part of you does the other? Any comments on sharing jobs and working together?
Oh yeah. We have a very clearly, if we work on something together, we have a very clearly defined. He does all the bedding and all the setting the glides and just all of the bedding of the keyframe, and then he'll usually do the key travel, which is the next thing we do. Everything is in, barely playable regulation. Nothing's too far out. It's out, but it's not like crazy out. It's all relatively in at this point. he'll do basically all of the keyframe work that needs to be done. And then he'll do any kind of shank and hammer moving and burning and moving and that needs to be done. Then then a lot of times I take over, or sometimes he keeps rolling, but it's the protocol is to set the repetition springs and then go from there. Repetition springs and then let off and then drop and then jack position and then, you know, you just keep going.
Do you end up adjusting repetition springs several times throughout a regulation process, or do you kind of feel like you get them on a first or second go and then you're able to move on from there?
That's a great question. It depends on how the action comes out at the end. Sometimes my preference is for stiffer springs than not stiff. My preference is for the hammers to come up from the back checks with some haste, but with no feeling in the key. So I just want it on that line where it's big, it's deep, deep, like that, like quick up, but with no feeling in it. Now, sometimes on some pianos, Yamahas, some other Asian pianos, a lot of different pianos.
Your audio is getting, you're maybe touching a speaker or something.
Oh, yes, I'm touching the microphone. Sorry. On some pianos, when you get the let off right and the drop right, according to your quote feel, it'll double hit. It'll blah, 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 blah. So you have to make the spring slightly weaker, and you probably have to bring the let off slightly farther away from the string, and maybe the drop slightly farther away from the string as well. On some pianos, when you get all done, that's the last check I do, called the bubble check, to make sure that on the softest blow, the hammers aren't going blah, 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 because it's real. If you don't check them, somebody's going to have a bad time down the road.
So I've noticed also, like, with several parts of regulation, upright pianos, grand pianos, whatever, regulating it as a piano technician, key by key, and testing it key by key that way seems to sometimes put me in a situation where I go, well, it's great, everything's working according to protocol. And then to actually play it, all these little things come out. So like the bubble check that you talked about, go through all the thing, I do my own little bubble check, and it's kind of nervous just even leaving it, because I'm thinking, if just one note does that, then I got to come back, but I don't want it to be too far away from the string. Any further tips on that, or is this kind of a intuition thing, a thing that you just generally start to feel better over time?
It's like, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? You practice. The more you do the work, the more fluid it becomes. The more you really understand. When the first years actually that I regulated, there was some pianos that just wouldn't come right. Even though I regulated them right to specifications, they just weren't right. Didn't feel right. And so I started to really understand that every single piano action is different. And every single piano action has a sweet spot for every regulation point and a sweet spot for the whole action. And that's going to be determined on the feel of the action rather than specifications, right? Like sometimes I used to do a big regulation and then I'd play it and it was like, well, it feels different, but it really doesn't feel better, you know? Somehow the aftertouch wasn't right, or the let off and drop didn't feel right. It was too spongy, something. Maybe the springs were too strong. And then after a while, you just learn what the tolerances are. You learn how to read that action and kind of try to feel the sweet spot. I think jack position is a tremendous, both height and distal to proximal positioning is a tremendously fine thing in grand pianos. And, you can get real precise with those. And, I've talked about jack position fore and aft to stop action noise for many years. And so there's leeway in specs, and you got to find what feels best to your fingers. I guess that comes. The more you do the work, the more it comes. The more you're allowed to work on better pianos, and there's a higher standard and kind of a higher bar set there. The better you get, the more subtle you get. It's the same with tuning, man. It's a subtle process. And here's one thing I want to say about regulation, or anything really, but certainly about regulation. You have to find a protocol that you can settle on and develop and get better at. Protocol for setting repetition springs, protocol for setting the drop, protocol for setting let off, protocol for every single regulation point. Do it the same way, and do it in a way that's fun and easy for you. Fun and simple, fun and challenging. I've learned how to do many regulation points in this alternative way where I'm really feeling it rather than reading a gauge or something like that. So if anybody else wants to chime in on that, I would love that. Maybe I'd love Susan Klein to talk about that. I'd love Carl to talk about that.
They should each be able to unmute themselves. You've also got some comments that are coming in through the chat, which we can review. And just as a follow-up to what you were saying, I think also one of these things about getting better at more what you might perceive as more difficult things, or things that are out of your typical practice, it seems to be a pattern that I see in all sorts of domains, and we've kind of mentioned it before, is you're not going to learn what you don't know until you start doing the thing. And then That's how you're going to get good at it. So there's something respectful, which is good, about having an attitude, well, I'm not going to approach things I'm not ready for. But I think on the other side of that is you won't know how to get ready until you start approaching them. So I think that speaks to what you're saying. How are you going to get better at knowing exactly how it's going to feel when the bubble check is enough? that's, you got to keep giving yourself opportunities to do that.
100%. 100%. And if you're not comfortable with something that's challenging for you, then do it more and it'll get less challenging. It's, Mark sent me a wonderful email about, how the class is good. And also that my little sister has written a book called Be Bad First, which is a very good book. Very good book. And it's a best-selling business book. And it's about the tremendous fear of failure that people have that prevents them from learning new things, that prevents them from extending their craft and their artisan abilities. Because
I think if you are working on a general line of pianos, not for fancy concerts, but it's easy sometimes to find a grand which is so horrible that you can't make it worse. And that can give you practice without doing any harm to anyone.
That's right. That's right. There's pianos all over all of our practices that can't get any worse, that are just, I know, that are so far out of regulation and so far out of anything that you can only shed mercy on them. You know what I mean?
And that breaks the ice. And then when you see other ones before a concert and a few notes are just a little bit bad, then you can work just on those. See, no harm done.
Right. Or if you can be fortunate enough to get in and be working on some new pianos in a dealer situation, and they let you do some action regulation as part of the preparation, man, just keep doing it. Just do it. Demand that people regulate their actions and be bold about it.
I got a lot of my practice from working at small colleges where the pianos were really worn out. And I had to work to get regulation to work when the thing really was due for a rebuild. And I found that getting the friction in the centers right was critical to getting a result. It didn't matter how perfectly you set everything up. If there's no friction in the hammer center, it's going to be very, very hard to avoid double striking or to get the lead off tight. So sometimes just spending a few times on the worst hammers just to get back within a reasonable amount of friction, and then suddenly everything works.
That's why you have to know how to repin flanges. Yes, absolutely. There's so much opportunity to learn and know if you're not hampered by your own fear of failure. If you're like, yeah, what's the worst I can do?
Well,
And
with these college pianos that are overplayed and under maintained, and sometimes the budget really isn't there, you can count that most of them will have too little friction. And so that gives you an opportunity to improve them.
That's
you don't
right.
ask top dollar for something you're not used to doing.
That's right.
And everybody's happy. Then they work, suddenly you're a miracle worker. They work right and you have the practice doing the work.
Well, that's right. And just speaking of repinning shank flanges, it's like a miracle on most pianos. A lot of pianos, 20, 30-year-old pianos, you pick up the shank and you swing it, and it swings 12 times or 14 times.
Swings as many times as you want to wait.
Yeah. You repin, you take 3 hours or 2.5, 3, something, depending on how good your hands work, and you repin those shanks. It's like, it really is a radical positive change in both the touch and the tone. Be
It's
careful.
like the piano got younger.
Yeah, way younger and brighter and sweeter and nicer. yeah, it's a huge shift. Shank flanges aren't supposed to have no friction. They're supposed to have a certain amount of grams of friction, from 3 to 5, I think.
Without friction, you have a terrible time getting the checking right.
You have a terrible time getting anything right. You have a terrible time getting any kind of really reliable repeat on repetition springs. It's just
And if you're also very aggressive about how tight you make the let off and drop when there's no friction in the hammer, then you have the double striking all over the place.
right. So I make repinning shank flanges, if necessary, one of the foundational activities of an action regulation, which is usually either a 1 or a 2-day thing with me.
Well, I think it makes the most difference in the biggest hurry. Really, it's a good use of time.
Which is what we're trying to do. As Norman Neblett said, and I quote before every class, if you can make a radical positive change in a piano in a relatively short amount of time, you win big for the rest of your career.
Yeah, if you have the wit to see what's actually holding you back.
Well, that's right. And that's the thing that stops most people, actually, is their fear. It's not that they can't learn how to do stuff, or that they don't have the ability to learn, or they don't have the opportunity to learn. All those things are gettable. It's their own fear of failure, of not being good. And you got to get over that. You really do. You got to put your little tuchus out over the wind and, risk a little bit. Like, for instance, I was terrified of working on dampers. Still am to a certain extent, but not as terrified as I was. I mean, I wouldn't even touch them. So I conquered my fear and was terrible at it until I got good at it relatively late in my career.
I got a few little hints from Doug Wood about how to get a split wedge to work down in the tenor when you didn't have time to really take the whole thing out and work on it. And he had a couple cute little tricks that helped me out from that. Not that you want to use them very often, but if you have some kind of first aid that you can offer at the last minute and it actually works, it goes a long way to improving your confidence.
And so what was the trick, real quick?
He would take a pliers and just bend the wire inward just slightly by the A-ref, kind of gently, with the damper off the string so that the spacing, it's changed the spacing at the last minute. And then you check very carefully to see about the unison. And it actually would work on some that just about nothing else I was doing was going to help.
Wow. In other words, change the internal position of the strings.
Yeah, change the spacing of the strings.
Yeah. Wow.
If you don't have time to change the damper itself.
So thank you, Susan. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Eathan, we're
just about on.
The clock on the wall says.
It says 1:59 my time, 2:59 Eastern time.
So did you talk about the conference?
I just did for a minute. I did mention it, so I'll mention that again briefly. We'll make a sign up link available and some various options, depending on how deeply you want to get involved in the conference. But that will be on December 10th to the 12th, and yeah, it's gonna be basically the first intentional, planned online piano tech conference. So looking forward to that. We did our quarantine piano tech conference impromptu several months ago.
Badass
Yeah.
presenters.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, just keep your ear to the ground for that. We'll put out some notices. We put links in the chat so you could sign up for Jude Reveley's class coming up in November. And I didn't mention the topic, subject to slight changes, but generally he said it's going to be about turbocharging the grand action, with specifically with a target of balance weight being sort of your primary interests. So we're talking a little about regulation today for those of you interested in regulation and, just getting the action working optimally. That should be a very interesting class.
Wow.
And next week we've got a sign up link so you can join us for Radio Hour with Udo Steingraber, who will be awesome. I think I'm looking forward to that quite a bit. And then also leave us some feedback. There's a feedback link in the chat as well. That's the tiny.cc/feedback-027. So yeah, yet again, we're left with lots of cool comments and questions in the chat. We had someone volunteering to bring up more about collaborative work. We had lots of inquiries about how to make the regulation process faster, things like that. So we'll earmark those topics for later dates. And in the meantime, we'll see you same time, same bad place with Udo Steingraber next week. Have a great week, everyone. Enjoy yourselves.
Bye. Thank you
really
very
appreciate
much.
having you here. Talk to you later.
See you when we're hosting